All right, so this is pretty amazing here that we're with a publicly traded company CEO and founder, and we're with a YouTuber, and now they have united into one. So for those of you who don't know, this is Gally Russell. He's the YouTuber from Hyperchange, which is a channel we love. This is Mark Frohnmayer, CEO of Arcimoto, a company we love. And they are now more than just, media talking about company. They are now kind of one. Can you guys tell us what just happened?
I think about a week ago, we announced that we have appointed Galileo to Arcimoto's board of directors. Galileo has been not just talking about Arcimoto, but he's been an Arcimoto investor for some time. He has provided along the way a lot of really thoughtful advice about directions that we might explore as Arcimoto, some of which has been very actionable and very helpful. And as we talked in the fall, he expressed a real interest in not just sort of campfire advice, but actually really being a part of the direction and strategy of the company. And I thought that made a lot of sense.
Yeah, I was so excited, and it felt like kind of the natural evolution of my journey with Arcimoto. Like I started 3 years ago, like Mark was saying, kind of as a skeptic. Like the company came onto my radar and I was like, this is such a cool, unique, bold concept, but like they don't have that much money in the bank. Like they're not actually building it. You can't really buy it yet. So I kind of made a skeptical video, and Mark actually commented in the YouTube comments on my video, and I'd like never seen that, with all this really thoughtful comments about my video. And then I eventually got on the phone with him and my ideas totally changed. I was like, wow, like Mark is actually an awesome entrepreneur, like sold his last company, like really in this for the right reasons, working on a really cool concept. So then I bought a little stock, ended up going down to Oregon to visit the company, and just was really, really impressed with what I saw on the ground. And then as I followed them, they just kept delivering. Like Arcimoto, they said they were going to enter production. Like every EV company we know, there's always a little delay, but like they actually they're still one of the only companies, I think, other than Tesla, that's gone from this honeymoon phase of displaying a vehicle to actually producing it, and you can buy it and starting those customer deliveries. So I was just so impressed with Arcimoto. And then I really have always been just, talking to Mark about my ideas for the company, unsolicited or not, just throwing advice his way. And I've always had so much fun in those conversations and visits to Eugene that I just felt like, hey, Mark, there's so much we can't talk about if I'm a shareholder and you're a director. Maybe it makes more sense if we can, like, I can go over the wall, so to speak, and actually become a director of the company, and we could work a lot closer together. And that might mean some sacrifices for what I can or can't say on YouTube, but I just felt like that was such an exciting opportunity to kind of really expand the relationship that had already been growing.
Well, a lot of people are excited about the fact that you are a director. I'm just showing on screen here a lot of congratulations from the Twitterverse. So obviously, this was a really smart move on Arcimoto's part. But I want to get to what is a board of directors? Because I think for a lot of people watching right now, it's something we're used to in movies. Like, I mean, if we go to the typical movie plot point where you walk into the board of directors and there's a bunch of stodgy old guys sitting around a table and they're like, no! Is that what you're going to be doing from now on?
Well, the board of directors is ultimately responsible for the company. The board hires and fires the CEO and is responsible for setting out the broad strategic direction of the company. The board is not there in the trenches every day, punching the clock. That is the job of the management and team of the company. But the board is ultimately, and particularly for a public company, the board really has a great deal of responsibility to the company's stakeholders to wisely direct the company through turbulent seas.
But it just seems like it's one of those jobs that you're just born into. Like, it just seems like from the pop culture view, it's like, oh, well, yeah, he's on the board of directors. I don't know how he got there, but like
you see a character in a movie, and the only boards of directors that they interact with are people who are already introduced to the character as boards of directors. They're not like, and hey, we're going to turn you into a director. Like, that's never a plot point in any movie or TV show that I think I've ever heard of. So I think for a lot of people, it's just sort of like, yeah, people are introduced to them as board members. It's kind of like, when you're young and you think that all the adults were always adults or something like that, or your teacher was always an adult. So you've just become a member of the board of directors, Gally. This, I think for a lot of people, is like the first time that they've known someone who is not on a board of directors and has now become on the board of something. So yeah, I just kind of want to walk through it and like, you know, first of all, how did it happen?
So we first started talking about it as a board in December. I think to your point, Jesse, that there has been the makeup of corporate boards, in particular public company boards, has typically been kind of an inside network, right? Where you have people who serve on a bunch of different boards, or they've held senior management positions in publicly traded corporations, and then, you know, help bridge relationships and so on. There's been a real push over the course of the last year to diversify boards. And you can see that with NASDAQ made, I think, a much needed rule having to do with diversity on boards. And I think what's really important for Arcimoto is that as a company that is aiming to really transform how people get around, that we have, you know, not just diversity in sort of background and skin color and gender, which is of course very important to us, but diversity of age, diversity of thought, as we're looking at a world that is in going through really transformative change, that having real forward-looking thought leaders in the change world is important to us. And who better than the hyper changer himself?
All right, so let's just break it down for people watching right now, because I think we hear CEO all the time, Chief Executive Officer. What is a Chief Executive Officer? Are they in charge of the board, or is the board in charge of that person?
The board's in charge of the CEO. So the board hires and can fire the CEO. They just actually recently formally hired me to be the CEO of Arcimoto. So I've long argued that I'm unemployable. Turns out that was an overstatement. But the CEO is the chief, is sort of the top of the company responsibility. So the CEO is the buck stopper for the day-to-day operations and execution of the company, and the CEO reports to the board of directors. And so the board is ultimately the fiduciary responsibility for the company as a whole. So the board's got to make good decisions about long-term direction and putting the right people at the top level of the company in order to execute the mission of the company.
I want to go back one step further, which is you start a private company. It might just be one person or two that are founders of a company. When you get to a certain stage and you want to actually set up a corporation, you need a board, and that might be just the two founders and maybe a third or fourth person. How does the board grow? In your case, I mean, this is a good person to talk to, because that's how you started your company, a private company. It was small to begin with. How did you grow your board?
So the board when you're a C Corp, you probably want to have 3 directors. And so the early directors of the company were myself, our Chief Operating Officer, Terry Becker, and one of our early investors, very early investors, a guy named Jeff Curl. We expanded the board. We brought on another one of our early angel investors, a guy named Jesse Eisler. And then what is typical when you have, say, a venture capital firm invests in a company, they will, if they're a significant investor, they will want a seat on the board. And so when Bill Hambrecht's venture firm invested in Arcimoto, one of the pieces of that was that they got to put somebody forward to sit on the board. So that was initially a guy named Thomas Thurston, who's a super smart guy focused on disruption theory. And then eventually his seat was taken by a guy named Josh Scherer, who is a super smart banker out of New York. But once you go public, there is a requirement that you have a certain number of independent directors. That is, people who are not working the day-to-day of the company. So we ended up when one of our directors went off the board, we began the process of just saying, okay, it's time to move from Arcimoto is moving from the early stage venture world, pre-production, to now we're a public company. Now we're in production. Now we're aiming for real global aspirations. It's time for us to really level up and broaden the board to go tackle this next stage of the company. And so we brought on Nancy Calderon, who is an incredibly sharp, she's just a financial whiz and has been doing public company work for a very long time. And then we're also in the process of saying, okay, we don't just want to have 5 directors. We actually want to have a larger board than that. Let's begin a formal process to seek out new board members. And that's really when Galileo came in and said, hey, this is something I would be interested in doing. To me, that was, I think, it was an easier vetting process for Galileo, simply because we've known him for a couple of years. He's provided meaningful, actionable advice for the company. I mean, Gali was the one who said, hey, I just had Sandy Monroe on my channel. You guys should hook him up. And in fact, I'll make that introduction. And 2 weeks later, we had a working arrangement with Monroe and Associates that has continued to bear fruit.
How does that conversation go when you brought that choice to your board and you said, hey, there's this 20-something guy. He's a YouTuber, and I think he'd make a great board member. Did they understand right away, or was there some explaining to go along with that?
I think there was a mix of reactions. I think a lot of it had to do with, one, Galileo, although he's a super smart dude, does not have a track record of public company board experience. So we are his first board of directors that he's sitting on. He runs a very popular YouTube channel. And so there is for sure the concern around, he cannot share material non-public information on his channel. We had to, and actually this is true of all of our directors. So we had to end up putting in place, what are the policies that all of our directors have to abide by to make sure that we're on the right side of the rules. To me, that age diversity component is actually really important. I mean, I think I look out there and I see just some really sharp. I mean, you look at the young investor out of the UK, this 12-year-old kid who's like going, hey, this is where I think the world is going and what needs to happen, and has been his whole life sort of living in this next gen world. That's a voice that I think is really important for us to have on the board. And so to me, that was I think a real selling point. And I think also it was certainly likewise a point of concern.
So Gali, a lot of people were really excited for you when you got appointed to the board, and there've been lots of questions on Twitter. I have a question here for you, but you've been pretty quiet, and I'm guessing that's because you probably wanted to figure out what you can and can't say. It's good to have Mark here to kind of educate us as to what you can do. You're a YouTuber. You're used to spouting off Moonshot Mondays and just crazy ideas that could come true. How is this going to be now when you talk about anything to do with FUV? We have a question here from our Now You Know Investor Club. Boet says, how do you plan to cover FUV and EVs in general going forwards now that people may accuse you of having a conflict of interest other than just being a stockholder?
That was kind of one sacrifice I definitely had to make, was if I want to be a director of Arcimoto, that means I can't really talk about it on my channel going forward, or as I can still, but not really as much. And my real priority now is to work for FUV. And so, yeah, and honestly, I was kind of really excited about that. And I think even though I'm always a YouTuber and I'm always talking about companies, the hat that I'm really wearing is an investor. And that's what I spend most of my time doing, is reading, SEC filings, financial statements, thinking about how companies can evolve, making partnerships, like, talking to CEOs and startup founders and that sort of stuff. So that's the hat where I really sort of bonded with Mark, and that I'm leading into for this Arcimoto role. And so even though it seems like I'm always a YouTuber, that's I was like, okay, now it's, more important things are at hand. And I just kind of had to make that sacrifice of I'd rather work for Arcimoto and not really cover it on my YouTube channel, which was kind of tough, but I think is definitely the right move, and I'm really excited.
That was actually one of the concerns of the board, was saying, well, are we going to lose a really powerful voice out there advocating for the company? And I, sort of first up, I sort of thought, well, if Galileo wants to spend his energy really helping to direct the company, I think it would be pretty rude of us to say no just because we want him to talk nicely about us on YouTube. But the second thing is, one of the other things Galileo's done is he has introduced us to and encouraged a bunch of other YouTubers out there to follow Arcimoto and be a part of the story. I mean, Galileo was the one who introduced us to Sean Mitchell. Galileo was the one who introduced us to Rob Maurer of Tesla Daily. And both of those guys have put up intro pieces on. Rob became a shareholder. So I think being the sort of one of the first ones in. I mean, it was really Now You Know and Hyperchange that were very early in the YouTube space to talk about Arcimoto. And I think now that we have sort of a broader distribution in that world, that's certainly less of a concern.
Let's talk a little bit about private versus public. You're now a public corporation. That happened a couple of years ago. Still, what can and can't you talk about when you're private versus going public? Have you noticed a difference in when you talk to the press from a couple of years ago before you IPO'd to now?
There's a lot you have to be careful of when you are public. One is you can't share material, non-public information with some people and not with others, unless you restrict those people, take them over the wall and say you can't trade in the stock based on this knowledge. So there's a real consideration of avoiding any kind of insider trading, giving some investors an advantage over other investors. And so that's a real issue. And that has very significant consequences if you don't follow the rules on that front. I think the other thing that we learned, and we learned this early on in being a public company while the stakes were still pretty small, is that you've got to be very careful about what is a statement of fact and what is a forward-looking statement. And I think we've seen this recently with some companies that have gone public with just, through SPACs, where you end up having just a giant bankroll and multi-billion-dollar valuations, and you're used to being you say aspirational things as though they've already happened, and that will absolutely get you burned as a public company because there, So we definitely have learned to say things like, we plan to do X when we haven't already done X. We don't say like X is a done deal if it's still something that we've got to prove out.
Does that give you pause, Gali, now that you are, you're still a YouTuber and you're also this director, and I'm sure you do want to talk about FUV from time to time. But before you were just a shareholder, so you could, as long as you said, hey, I'm a shareholder, so take that with a grain of salt. So now, do you plan on just basically not talking about FUV at all, or how are you going to talk about it?
No, yeah, I'm definitely still going to talk about it. I think I just have to be more careful and not talk about like what I think in the future and all that sort of stuff. And the other big thing is I'm really excited to be an FUV customer. So that's an angle that I'm really excited to share with people because, everyone wants an FUV, but there's not that many on the road. And so I put my pre-order down and I've designed it. And so I'm hoping to get my FUV in the near future and be able to share a bunch of content about like what's it like to actually own it and just kind of helping people bring them along that journey of actually experiencing the FUV as a product.
We have another question from our Now You Know Investor Club. Vlad asks, any thoughts on a potential Tesla acquisition?
That would certainly involve forward-looking statements if we were to even hypothesize there, but there have been no material discussions that we have disclosed or have had in that direction. I've definitely been asked in the past, would Arcimoto consider being acquired? Is that your exit strategy? The answer is, the exit strategy is that we're a public company. Investors can come in and out as they please. But when it comes to acquisition, there's really a very short list of companies that I believe Arcimoto being acquired by would advance our mission faster than we're going to be able to do it ourselves. And so, I would definitely put companies like Tesla on that very short list.
All right. How about this one from Paolo? How does Gali see FUV benefiting from his strengths?
Like Mark said, I think just the kind of new angle of thinking about media, I built Hyperchange. We have like 100-something thousand subscribers. I don't know, but never spent $1 on marketing, and just kind of this new approach of like content is king. I've learned a lot from watching Tesla and just studying different businesses. I'm trying to bring sort of a new way of thinking to what Arcimoto does, how they announce new products, how we develop new products, how we design the website, the digital side of the company as well. And that's one thing that I was really excited to kind of go over the wall with Mark on, because like you said, when you're public, there's just such a hard line of like what you can and can't know. And it's really restrictive of like, me and Mark are having all these conversations, and it kept being like, oh, well, I can't tell you this, or we're not really supposed to allowed to talk about that, or like, so it just got to the point of like, I really realized that I felt like I could really help a lot more and be in the room and really strategize with Mark if I was over the wall. And so it's hard to pinpoint like one exact angle, but just these kind of general, and like we were talking about the board of directors before, I think it's such a gray area of what it is. And I think, simply the other side is like governance and that sort of stuff, but it's also meetings with the CEO or like this team of advisors that Mark can call at any moment and just like have a meeting and bounce ideas around and just talk about the company and think about it from all these different angles. And so me being on the board just really allows me to be kind of one more voice in that room.
That's really interesting because, you kind of think of it, if you're the CEO of a company, that you call anyone into your office and here, talk to me about this. Tell me about this. Well, here's what I'm thinking. Mark can't do that. He can't call you into his office and tell you about all of the different plans that Arcimoto might have, because that would be insider trading if you aren't on the board. So I guess that's a big reason why Arcimoto wanted to have you on the board.
When Galileo was talking about sort of the marketing approaches, even just this last fall, he volunteered. He's like, you should do customer testimonial videos. Get your customers to do a handheld recording. So we immediately did that, and it turned into the FUV Life video, which was just awesome because it's the real experience of the product. He's like, he had great ideas on merchandising, great ideas on the configurator, so those were just the sorts of things where, those don't necessarily even have anything to do with the material non-public stuff, but just good, actionable direction advice for the company. And that, to me, that's just having him in the conversation on that level. I think one is it does certainly let us scheme about longer range stuff. But I think it's also a recognition of just continuing to bring good value and good direction to the company.
I'm a FUV shareholder. It's my second biggest holding after Tesla, and I'm super stoked that you have Gali on the board. And I never thought of it. I never thought like this could ever be a thing, probably just because I was stuck in this world where I thought, well, he's a YouTuber and you're a public company, and never the two shall meet.
But board members are just summoned out of thin air, right, as 50-year-old men. They're never someone that you've met before, and then they're like, I happen to be on the board of a company. I've never experienced that in my life, so I wasn't thinking in terms of that.
And I mean, if you were to pick the two best qualities of a board member, Gali's got them. I mean, not only is he know everything about EVs and the entire EV world, but he knows everything about finance and stocks and everything that, in marketing. So I mean, you're putting all of those perfect qualities together, and I think it's more companies should actually be looking for people like this. Although I will point out, most YouTubers are not Gali. Gali is a one of a kind. I mean, he's awesome at his job as a YouTuber of getting the word out to people, but he's also really smart. And so, yeah, I just think it was a super smart move, Mark.
Well, and I would say the sort of primary, even above those, is just alignment with the mission. And so that to me is so critical, particularly when you think about, the board is there to really carry the long-term vision and of the endeavor. And so having Galileo come on board where that just wasn't really any kind of a question. That's the first box to check.
So now I'd like to bring up some questions from Twitter. Jake Stevens says, is there any compensation for being a board member?
We have a board compensation package, and it just depends on, it's basically you get a certain amount of stock every quarter for serving on the board, and then those who serve on certain committees get a little bit more. The chairman gets a little bit more, but so you get stock, and that I think also is another one of those things that it's both keeps company and mission alignment, and then also lets us attract the right caliber of board member to drive the company forward.
And having good incentives is what leads to success. I mean, if we look at Tesla, for example, Elon has a really good incentive package. He doesn't, get a salary, but he does get stock if he hits certain, guidelines, and that has really led him to success. He had all the incentive in the world to push Tesla as fast and as hard as he could because that was in place. So I think it's really smart to have a compensation package for directors, because otherwise it's just like, oh yeah, that company, oh yeah, I guess I'll talk to the CEO for an hour and then I'll go back to the rest of my business. You don't care as much if you're not being compensated, and stock is a great method to do that.
Gali, can you talk to me about this idea that I think we see a lot on YouTube, especially in comments from people who are like, this is a conflict of interest, whether it's, that we're shareholders in the company or now that you're a board of director member. It seems like a lot of people just aren't exposed, let's say, to this world, and so they think that there's just, you know, conflict of interest everywhere. I feel like we walk that line every day. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, I like bought, you know, I've never been paid by Arcimoto. I never like got a free Arcimoto. Like I paid full price, you know, and I actually gave the company money and bought stock in the open market. And that's what I do for all the things I support. Like I literally don't get payment from Tesla, from anyone. And I think that's super important. And it's kind of a shame that some people are like always take the negative tone and just assume that it's like that. But yeah, that's something I'm really proud of. And like, you know, I visited Arcimoto on my own dime multiple times and stayed there and just have been giving as much of my time as possible. And like, honestly felt like I had to kind of prove myself and wanted to show and put up the work up front because being on the board is a really big deal. And I wanted to kind of sort of prove myself in that way and really show the value because I think it's an amazing opportunity to be on the front lines of, you know, cliche, but hyperchange, because Arcimoto, like they have this factory in Eugene, they're constantly iterating. Like it's so exciting. Like I get the same like kind of excited butterfly feeling that I get when I walk in the Tesla factory of like, oh my God, like this is so exciting. Like you can tell the future is happening here. So just having a front row seat at that, I think is an unbelievable privilege. And just like the space that Arcimoto is in, this kind of, you know, new ways of getting people around cities that are more sustainable is just, we're so early in scratching the surface. And so, yeah, I was like, I'll do anything I can to just get a front seat at that kind of roller coaster.
I'm just excited because if you were to write a movie about hyperchange, it just seems like this would be the natural next chapter, that you would join a company that, like you just said, is on the forefront of changing how we think about transportation. And now you're there able to help bring decisions to that company and ideas to that company. And what's also exciting to me is that people get better, in my opinion, when you have two great people in a room or three or four, because then just new ideas are bounced around and come out of it that wouldn't have maybe come out of just one great person. I feel like the ideas that you guys are going to come up with together are going to be even better.
For sure. You start scheming with Galileo for half an hour, and pretty soon you've got 5 new product ideas and 3 new kinds of merch, and you know, a complete redesign of the website. So and adding him to a board of really smart people that have that, you know, where we can get like that real nucleus effect, I think is critical. On the topic of conflict of interest, what is probably most important is that interest is disclosed, right? That it's, you know, Galileo is not saying, hey, you know, go buy a ton of Arcimoto stock. He's saying, I'm an Arcimoto investor. Now he's saying, I'm an Arcimoto director and investor. So everything that I say about Arcimoto should take that into account. Right. And so disclosure of interest is sort of primary there. Whether it's a conflict, I mean, I see it as sort of an alignment of interest. He has aligned his investor interest with his consumer interest, now his director interest. And so it becomes very important to disclose that. And I think is ultimately the way to avoid the conflict portion of it is to do less pontificating about Arcimoto's future on his channel, and more of that just with us in the virtual boardroom.
Interesting. So, I mean, we have some questions on Galley's Twitter here, like a question of, if autonomy is the future, what will Arcimoto do to stay competitive? So, for instance, if he wanted to pontificate on it on his channel or here, he could, I guess, say like, okay, I am a director, I own stock, and here's my thoughts, right? I mean, he's allowed to say that. Well,
and the easiest way, I think, for him to, and this is, again, for I think it's going to become, when talking about forward-looking plans that we haven't talked about. So again, that's, if we've talked about it and we've talked about autonomy, we've said, hey, we're designing the platform to be autonomous ready. Our plan is to team up with anyone and everyone who's developing sensor and software stacks. We think that the Arcimoto platform is an ideal platform for the 85% of rideshare that is just one passenger, for moving parcels. We think it's going to be good for moving material around the factory. And so I think anything that's inside of the corners of what Arcimoto has already talked about is fair game to discuss. But if we want to really talk about stuff that is just future prognostication and random stuff, the best bet is either not do it or do it with someone who is a spokesperson for the company on the channel at the same time. So if he can always bring me on, and I can talk about how we look at the future there, because I'm designated as sort of one of the couple official spokespeople of Arcimoto.
That makes sense. So we had a question here. Let's just try it out. This will be a test. Question from Daryl Park. He said, are there plans for fast or faster charging tech built in during manufacturing? So if, I don't know, let's just try and give Gali a hand at this. How would you handle it, Gali, if you were asked this question by some random YouTubers?
I would say that's exactly the kind of thing that I used to be able to comment on, but now I can't comment on. And I would say Mark could talk about that.
Yeah, and there, if you would just have to remember that during a couple of earnings calls over the last summer, I got asked that question, and what I said basically was, the short answer is yes. We higher speed charging is on the roadmap. We haven't announced any specific plans around it. A lot of people have asked, are we going to have supercharger compatibility? I think when we look at Tesla, access to the supercharger network is something we would love. Access to 4680 battery cells is something that we would love. We think ultimately, if there is an ability to put the full self-driving stack on top of the Arcimoto platform, that's something we would absolutely entertain. But we have not announced any plans for that at this point.
Driving around an FUV in Eugene, it already charges really fast. Like I will say, like overnight, you're going to get a full tank. And I was driving around Eugene for like 4 days. And I wouldn't have even needed to plug it in. So as an FUV consumer from that angle, I could say like the charging speed, because the Tesla has a huge battery pack, right? The Arcimoto's battery pack is a lot smaller. It actually has a higher MPGE than even the Tesla. And so you don't need as much power to fully charge the pack. So even if you're on your slow outlet, you can I think you can do pretty much a full charge in one night, even from a standard slow outlet, right, Mark?
Yep. Yeah, and that was... it just sort of goes back to some of the early thesis points of the Arcimoto we've conceived this platform for daily utility, the kind of trips that almost everybody's doing almost all the time. It is not designed for carrying 5 people 300 miles to go skiing. It's designed to go get groceries, to go get a cup of coffee, to go out with a friend, to have a fun little joyride jaunt on the weekend. And it does very well at those things. It sips power, which means that you can get a great charge out of a 110 outlet. So you don't have to install a charging station. You don't need a level 2 charging station, let alone a much higher capacity charger. As we look at some use cases, and this would be for a delivery vehicle that is, on the road for 16 hours during a day, where you would want to have a 20-minute, 80% charge. That's something where we think we can expand the market by adding that capability. But we think we've got a whole lot of market to go after, especially at low volume with the capability that we've got now.
There's a lot of people on Twitterverse who want to know, like Kern does, watch out, he's going to make you buy Bitcoin. So I guess the question for both of you is that, in Arcimoto's future?
Sore subject. We have different, this is why opposing angles of thought are so important, because even though Mark and I are so aligned on some things, I would say this is where we have a strong difference of opinion.
Well, yeah, and I would say I'm not a cryptocurrency speculator. I have particular beef with the Bitcoin algorithm simply because it sucks power. And the more compute you throw on it, is like the higher it goes, the more people are just buying machines to do nothing but run essentially cryptographic algorithms, finding cryptographic needles in the haystack in order to get those coins. But I am not averse to cryptocurrency. I think that there are a lot of reasons why that's going to be an ever-growing piece of the economic puzzle. I'm just not sure that I'm attached to that particular one that happens to be the leader today. And I do think that there are a lot of people out there who basically, bought into Bitcoin and now they're promoting the hell out of Bitcoin, which makes sense for them, but not necessarily the long-term solution there.
And in a slightly different vein, I can say one thing that really impressed me while I was studying Arcimoto for the past couple of years was how efficient they were with money. Like we're seeing a lot of these other EV startups raise a huge amount of capital. Rivian's raised almost 5 or 6 billion, hasn't delivered a single car, and that's kind of the status quo now. But when I saw Arcimoto, I was like, this is totally different. Like they've navigated almost a triple black diamond of going public in this new way, being able to raise capital through the ups and downs of that cycle, and at the same time being extremely efficient with that capital spend. Like it sounds like, okay, maybe I believe they spent about 40 million to bring the FUV to all through development to bring it to market and actually production and do it vertically integrated. I mean, I almost thought that was unprecedented capital efficiency and would put them in the place of like Tesla and Arcimoto are the only two companies that I was like, wow, they're spending a lot. So people don't realize how much capital discipline there's been. But that was something that in my studying of Arcimoto really stood out from almost every other EV company was like, wow, they're extremely efficient with every dollar that comes into the company, and it really matters.
And it's a culture thing too. I mean, you have this, Mark is a perfect example. You don't like Bitcoin because it's just inefficient. And your company, you run your company cash efficient, and your vehicles are energy efficient. All of this kind of very tied to efficiency kind of thing. It's all part of the culture of your company. And I think when we look at some of the other companies like Rivian that you mentioned, or even like maybe even Lucid, a lot of money comes in. We're going to build big batteries. We're going to have big ranges. And, are the cars going to be as efficient as an Arcimoto? Heck no, not even close. And, I don't know. I think that that's an interesting parallel to draw with, all of the different companies that we've seen entering the EV space. Tesla is one of the most efficient, both like EV car manufacturing brands to date in terms of how their vehicles are efficient. And then also how they have been so, as you said, efficient with capital.
Gali, I wanted to ask you, has it sunk in yet? I mean, you've gone from being a YouTuber where you talk to thousands of people every week about good ways to invest their money in this growing future, this EV revolution. And now you're on a board where your ideas can go directly into making products. Is that I don't know. That just is blowing my mind as I'm talking about it with you.
It totally blows my mind. And I feel like the luckiest person ever that I've just like, my life has kind of unfolded that way. But at the same time, it's also just really been this natural evolution of like, I read Warren Buffett's book when I was like 14 and just started rolling my snowball and trying to, I was back in a previous life, I was an investor in a company called Jones Soda, this local soda company. Now I'm like, soda, that seems so lame. But we like went to the shareholder meeting. There was like 5 people there, and me and my friend Julian went, and like we wanted to be there. We wanted to put our voice, wanted to have our opinion, wanted to just say what we thought and, advise the CEO, even though they were like, who are these 20-something-year-olds that someone actually showed up to the board meeting? Like, what's happening? Or the shareholder meeting. So for me, it's been like this kind of lifelong passion of just finding these companies, trying to help them in any way I can, and trying to help explain and tell the story about, why they're doing what they're doing, why the financials look a certain way, why their strategy makes sense, and why, like, to me, the really big disconnect that makes me so happy with the EV and the Tesla and Arcimoto taking off is that it's really invest in the future you believe in. Like, I think we've seen a real mindset shift of people who want to they're like, you know what? The world needs to change this way. Like, I should start giving money to the company. Like, I was talking to Mark. I was like, investing, I feel like it's kind of lost its thing. Like, you invest in something because you want it to grow. You want to see that product exist. Like, to me, that's exactly what I felt with the Arcimoto. Like, I rode one. It didn't exist, but I was like, the world needs this. I want to give this thing money and help in any way I can because I want to see like 1 million of these on the road. And so I just feel so blessed that like, I can, work with Mark and help him and kind of take our, like he said, campfire ideas that we almost just got so wrapped up on. Like, I would talk to Mark, once every couple of weeks, when I wasn't on the board, just because I had so many ideas and had so much stuff I wanted to tell him. And so I feel like really honored that they kind of recognized that I was maybe adding some value and we could kind of take it to the next level with this board appointment.
That's a really interesting point. The fact that I think the same way you do. When I'm investing my money, I want to see that money used, that capital used for something good. I think today, so many people see the stock market. They don't understand the difference that you talk about a lot on your channel between investment and trading. I see them talking all the time, like even on our Slack channel, FUV is up, FUV is down. It's like, I don't really care about the weekly movements of the stock. I care about putting in my money. I'm a long-term investor, and I'm not really going to watch it that closely because I want you guys to use the money well to build whatever whatever you're going to build. And I love the fact that you just brought that up. I want people to get this message, which is if you believe in something, put your money in it. And that is how we'll move ourselves forward. Don't put your money into Exxon just because you think you'll get a dividend from them. That's not what this is about.
Well, you think about your retirement fund. People think about, well, I'm going to retire in 15 years. I got to make sure that I've got enough in my 401k to support me. But I think there's a growing consideration of what's the world going to be like in 15 years? And am I really, is the whole rest of the world, am I investing in the world that I want to live in? And that's when that becomes a component, it makes for very different investment decisions. And I would say it is, Arcimoto has always been powered by a community of people who see a change in how we do things as absolutely necessary for a future that we want to live in. And so in each one of those people, everyone who's bought in has made a meaningful difference in the success of the company, because ultimately our shareholder base is what drives our valuation, is what affects our ability to attract additional sums of capital to move forward the mission. So we are super thankful for everyone who invests in the way that you guys are talking about.
I'd love to hear your thoughts more philosophically about, do you think that people have always been able to invest in the future and see the change by the time they retire? Is that what, I mean, is that new, do you think, or has that always been the case? It's just been, in order to be a big investor or an investor at all, you'd have to be filthy stinking rich in order, because you used to have to buy 100 shares of a company in order to even put in an order. Now I can buy fractional shares of whatever company I want, and I can feel like, even though it's a drop in the bucket, that I am making a difference, and so it's become more democratized. Like, is that the change, or is it that the speed of technology is accelerating, or is it both?
I guess I would say probably it's when you think about the advent of benefit corporations in the 2007, 2008 timeframe, where corporate social responsibility started to become a thing, where triple bottom line started to become a thing. We have corporations, and particularly public ones, have always had really just one core responsibility, which is to deliver near and long-term financial wins for their shareholders. And when what we did at the beginning of Arcimoto is that we said, actually, in addition to that, the company will consider in its general interest the communities in which it operates and does business, and the environment as a whole. And more companies are moving in that direction. So I think this has been a pretty recent change where companies begin to put out sustainability reports. What are we actually doing in terms of sustainability? And then that becomes I think partly because that's becoming such a critical criteria for investors, as they're saying, this notion of investing for the future, and not just being, I want to have more cash, but I want a future that's going to be a lot more fun. That's, I think, much more within the last couple of decades, that's really come to the fore, particularly in the public markets.
When we heard the news a week ago, Jesse and I just were high-fiving, and we were just so stoked for you guys. I'm super bullish now, more than ever before, because I just think that this is like a dream come true. This is like a dream team, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just so excited to see you guys working together. Congratulations. I
mean, I also kind of wanted to just give a shout out to you guys, because I feel like you're like, whoa, a YouTuber's on the board of directors. And I'm like, I feel like I was there with Now You Know for the past few years covering Arcimoto. And so in many ways, I feel like it's kind of a win for the whole YouTube community, and just wanted to give you guys a shout out for your coverage of Arcimoto, because I think it's been awesome over the years. I've been a viewer, so I've loved to see that.
Thanks. I mean, we keep pushing for like some kind of spot on Tesla's board, right? We want to be VPs of special operations or something. So Elon, if you're watching, I mean, call us.
I don't even need a board seat, honestly. I don't need much. Just
Just a little plaque or something.
As long as my voice gets heard, you know. I mean, heck, it does. Nothing needs to change.
No, but that's it right there. I mean, we want our voice to be heard. It's so awesome, Gali, that your voice is being heard. I mean, it was being heard before you were a board member, which is awesome. But now you really can get in there and talk about stuff. I think that's fantastic. You're going to bring a lot to Arcimoto. It's going to be really great to see.
Hope so.
Well, guys, thanks a ton for having us on the program. And I would echo Gali and say, you guys, the three of you, have been really instrumental in helping share Arcimoto's story with the broader world. You were the first in the YouTube space to really say, hey, these guys might be onto something. And I've appreciated the continuing dialogue. So again, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. That was great. I just, anytime you guys want to be on, I love having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.